Chapter 1. The End and Beginning. Hey guys, this is my first fanfic, so please if you have any notes, comments, critiques, or general ideas for the story, make sure to let me know. I just finished watching the first season of To Be a Hero X and saw that there weren't any fanfics with him as a template and thought his powers and the power system would be cool to integrate into an anime. Thought on this FIC for a bit and determined that Black Clover would be the perfect world to do it, and plus it is a bonus there are not many Black Clover fics on this site besides a few I have read. If you haven't watched To Be a Hero X you definitely should, and X just seemed like a sick character to write about. Now enough of all that, here's the story, hope you enjoy. Third person POV. The harsh blue light of Kenji Nakamura's computer monitor cast shadows under his tired eyes as he slumped in his desk chair at 2:47 a.m. Empty energy drink cans littered his workspace like metallic tombstones, standing vigil over another soul-crushing day at the accounting firm. His fingers moved mechanically across the keyboard, inputting numbers that would make rich people richer while he slowly withered away in his cramped Tokyo apartment. Click, type, enter, repeat. The same routine for the past 6 years since graduation. Wake up, work 14 hours, go home, collapse, repeat. No friends, they'd all drifted away when he became a corporate zombie. No girlfriend, who had time for relationships when quarterly reports demanded blood sacrifices. No hobbies except. His eyes drifted to the second monitor where, To Be Hero X, was paused the final episode. The image showed Hero X standing triumphantly, his finger poised in that iconic snap pose that could reshape reality itself. Kenji's chest tightened with familiar longing. Must be nice, he muttered, taking another sip of his fifth energy drink. Just snap your fingers and change everything. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, watching an episode about a man who like his worked a dead-end office job, but could manipulate reality with a thought, while Kenji couldn't even manipulate his boss into giving him a day off. Hero X, the mysterious top-ranked hero whose true identity remained hidden, whose powers seemed limitless, who could turn 2D into 3D, fold space like paper, and rewrite the very fabric of existence. What would I do with powers like that? Kenji wondered, not for the first time. First thing, snap my fingers and make this damn job disappear. Then maybe, actually live for once. Finding that he could no longer continue working while thinking like this, Kenji finally shut off his desktop and proceeded to watch the final episode of his current favorite anime. He found himself in awe of the way X could simply will things to change, how the animation style itself would shift to reflect his power. It was everything Kenji wished he could do to his own mundane existence. In a world where trust determines power, the narrator's voice echoed from his headphones, Hero X stands above all others, wielding abilities beyond imagination. Trust. That was the key to the To Be Hero X universe. The more people believed in a hero, the stronger they became. It was such a beautiful concept, power through connection, strength through faith. Unlike this world, where power came from money, connections, and crushing others beneath your heel. Kenji's vision blurred slightly. When was the last time he'd slept? Actual sleep, not just passing out at his desk for a few hours before the next crisis hit. His chest felt tight, and there was a strange tingling in his left arm. Probably just stress, he told himself, rubbing his chest absently. Just need to finish these reports and... The pain hit like lightning, sharp and sudden. Kenji gasped, his hand flying to his chest as fire spread through his ribs. The energy drink can tumble from his grasp, spilling caffeine-laden liquid across his keyboard. No, he wheezed, fumbling for his phone. But his vision was tunneling, and his fingers wouldn't cooperate. The room spun sickeningly as he collapsed forward, his face hitting the desk with a dull thud. On the screen, Hero X stood motionless, that enigmatic smile hidden behind his glasses as reality bent to his will. I just wanted to matter, was Kenji's last coherent thought before darkness claimed him. Consciousness returned gradually, like surfacing from deep water. Kenji found himself standing in an endless expanse of white, not harsh and sterile, but warm and comforting, like fresh snow kissed by morning sunlight. There was no up or down, no horizon, just infinite possibilities stretching in every direction. Welcome, Kenji Nakamura. He spun around to find a figure that defied description. Sometimes it appeared human, sometimes geometric patterns of light, occasionally resembling characters from the anime still playing in his final moments. The only constant was a white figure floating in front of him. Am I? Kenji's voice came out stronger than expected. Am I dead? Your physical form has ceased functioning, yes. The being's voice held neither judgment nor sympathy, just simple fact. It seems your heart could no longer handle the constant intake of energy drinks and lack of sleep, resulting in your current state. How sad, modern society claims another victim. Kenji looked down at his hands, still his hands, but somehow more substantial than they'd felt in years. So this is the afterlife. One interpretation of it, I am what you might call a random omnipotent being, though I prefer to think of myself as a facilitator of second chances. The entity shifted, taking on a more human appearance, tall, androgynous, with eyes that held the depth of eternity. You spent your final years dreaming of escape, of power, of the ability to reshape reality itself. You were watching me. Heat flushed Kenji's cheeks. That's incredibly invasive. A sound that might have been laughter rippled through the space. I observe many souls during their final moments. Most beg for more time, for wealth, for revenge against those who wrong them. But you wished for the power to change not just your circumstances, but reality itself. Specifically, you wished for the abilities of Hero X from that animated series you were so fond of. Kenji's heart would have skipped if he still had one. You can do that. I can do many things. The question is whether you truly understand what you're asking for. The being gestured, and images flashed through the air, scenes from To Be Hero X, showing Hero X's reality manipulation in action. These powers come with a cost. In their original universe, they function through trust and belief. In the world I'm considering sending you to, that mechanism will remain. What world? Kenji asked. More images materialized. Floating grimoires, magic knights soaring through the air, a world where social hierarchy was determined by magical power rather than corporate politics. The Black Clover universe, a realm where magic is commonplace, where those with power can truly make a difference. But also where discrimination, corruption, and conflict run deep. You're offering to reincarnate me there, with Hero X's powers. Yes, but listen carefully. The being's voice grew serious. Your powers will be limited by the trust others place in you. Start with nothing, and you'll have nothing. Build connections, prove yourself worthy of faith, and your power will grow accordingly. The more people who believe in you, truly believe, not just casual acquaintance, the more of reality you can reshape. Kenji's mind raced. So I'd start powerless, not powerless. You'd have the capacity for Hero X's full range of abilities, but accessing them would require mana generated through trust. Think of it as a video game where your MP grows based on your reputation level. The analogy was crude but effective. Kenji could picture it, starting small, helping people, building relationships, slowly growing stronger until he could manifest Hero X's reality-bending techniques in full. There's one more thing, the being continued. You'll retain your memories of both your previous life and your knowledge of the To Be Hero X series. However, you'll be placed into that world at a crucial juncture, in the same village where two important figures are growing up. Your presence may alter events significantly. Asta and Kenji knew immediately who the being meant. What kind of alterations? That depends entirely on the choices you make. Your knowledge could prevent tragedies or cause new ones. Your powers could save lives or create dependency. Free will remains yours, but consequences will follow. Kenji closed his eyes, thinking of his old life, the endless reports, the soul-crushing routine, the slow death by 1,000 corporate cuts. Then he imagined something different, freedom. He would be truly free to live the life he wants. When you say I'll be placed there, what form will I take? A 6-year-old child, 2 years older than the protagonists you know. Your appearance will be distinctive upon arrival, but will settle into something more normal afterward. Consider it a dramatic entrance befitting someone reborn. This statement made Kenji a little worried. Nervously he asked, "What do you mean by dramatic entrance?" As he began to have cold sweat pour down his back. How am I even sweating right now? The being's smile was both kind and slightly mischievous. Let's just say that your introduction to this new world will be memorable. Kenji. Seeing Kenji's nervous silence, the being's smirk grew even wider, saying, "Well, that is all the time we have. Enjoy your new life and remember, power without wisdom is destruction, but wisdom without power is helplessness. Build trust, forge bonds, and perhaps you'll find that the reality you can reshape most profoundly is your own." The last thing Kenji saw before everything dissolved was the being's knowing smile, and the last thing he heard was a sound that would soon become very familiar, the sharp, reality-altering snap of fingers that could change the world. Then he was falling through dimensions, through possibility itself, toward a new life where magic was real and he could live as freely as he wanted. Kenji. AHHHHHHHHHH. 14 comments 0 vote. Chapter 2. The Snap. Chapter 2. The Snap. Pav. Father Orsi. Father Orsi wiped the sweat from his brow as he gently rocked Nash in his arms, the infant's soft coos mixing with the afternoon breeze that swept across Hage Village. The sun hung high in the clear sky, casting long shadows from the simple wooden buildings that made up their humble home. Beside him, Sister Lily held baby Rekka, her gentle humming adding to the peaceful atmosphere that surrounded the church orphanage. Father Orsi, Sister Lily, watch this. Asta's voice boomed across the courtyard as the energetic 4-year-old attempted what could generously be called a cartwheel, though it looked more like an enthusiastic tumble through the dirt. Asta, be careful, Sister Lily called out with a fond smile, adjusting Rekka in her arms. You'll hurt yourself if you're not. I did it. Did you see? I'm gonna be the strongest. Asta shouted, completely ignoring the fact that he'd face planted into a patch of grass. Yuno, standing several feet away, watched his adoptive brother with what might have been amusement flickering in his golden eyes. That wasn't a cartwheel, Asta. It was more like controlled falling. It was amazing, Asta protested, jumping to his feet and brushing dirt from his messy ash blonde hair. Right, Father, Sister Lily. Father Orsi chuckled, the warm sound mixing with Nash's contented babbling. Very impressive, Asta, though perhaps. Snap, the sound cut through reality like thunder, sharp and crystalline, reverberating not just through the air but through the very fabric of existence itself. It was impossibly loud, a sound that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, carrying across hundreds of kilometers as if the world itself had cracked. Father Orsi stumbled backward, his grip tightening protectively around Nash as the infant immediately began wailing. But the crying was almost drowned out by something far more impossible. The world around them was changing. Color bled into reality like spilled paint, vibrant and alive, transforming their simple courtyard into something that belonged in a dream. The browns and greens of the countryside exploded into brilliant purples, electric blues, and golden yellows that moved and flowed as if they had consciousness. The very air shimmered with animation, lines and shapes dancing through space in impossible ways that hurt to look at directly. What in the? Father Orsi words died in his throat as the animated chaos swirled before them, reality bending and twisting like pages in a cosmic book. Sister Lily gasped, instinctively pulling Rekka closer to her chest as the baby's cries joined Nash's terrified wailing. Father, what's happening? And then, in the center of the swirling maelstrom of color and impossibility, a figure materialized. A boy was falling, no, plummeting, through the animated space, his scream of terror cutting through the surreal atmosphere. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old, but everything about his appearance defied comprehension. Stark white hair whipped around his face, and his eyes blazed with an otherworldly whitish light that seemed to hold depths of knowledge no child should possess. He wore a pristine white suit that belonged in a formal gathering, not falling from impossible heights, with an elegant X where a tie should have been. Ah! The boy screamed, his voice raw with terror and confusion as he tumbled through the air. Nash and Rekka's crying reached a fever pitch, their infant minds unable to process the assault on reality happening before them. Rekka thrashed in Sister Lily's arms while Nash's tiny fists waved frantically. Yuno's mouth fell open, his usually composed demeanor shattered as he stared with wide golden eyes at the impossible scene unfolding before them. His analytical mind struggled to categorize what he was witnessing, failing to find any logical explanation. But Asta's eyes lit up like stars. Awesome, he shouted over the chaos, his voice filled with pure, unbridled excitement. That's the coolest thing I've ever seen. How is he doing that? As suddenly as it had begun, the animated chaos snapped back to normal. The colors drained away like water, the impossible geometry collapsed into familiar three-dimensional space, and the world returned to its mundane appearance. But the boy continued falling, his white hair darkening to black even as Father Orsi watched, his blazing eyes shifting to normal brown, and his formal white suit transforming into simple commoner's clothing, brown pants and a beige shirt that would fit in perfectly among Hage Village's residents. The transformation was complete by the time Sister Lily's training kicked in. Water creation magic. Holy hands of love, she called out, her grimoire floating beside her as magical circles appeared in the air. Hands made of crystalline water materialized beneath the falling boy, catching him gently but firmly before he could crash into the hard-packed earth. The water hands lowered him carefully to the ground, where he landed in a crouch, breathing heavily. For a moment, the boy simply knelt there, his new black eyes wide with shock and slightly bloodshot from his ordeal. Then he looked up at the clear blue sky and screamed with raw indignation. That was a little more than dramatic. The outburst was so unexpected, so filled with genuine outrage, that it cut through even Nash and Rekka's crying. The babies, perhaps sensing that the immediate threat had passed, began to quiet soft whimpers and hiccups. Father Orsi stood frozen for a heartbeat, his mind still reeling from what he'd witnessed. Colors that moved like living things, a child appearing from nowhere, reality itself bending like paper, it was beyond anything he'd experienced in his years serving the church. But then his pastoral instincts kicked in, and he gently transferred Nash to Sister Lily's free arm. "Sister, please take the children inside," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the tremor he felt. I'll speak with the boy." Sister Lily nodded, understanding immediately. Whatever had just happened, they needed to handle it carefully. "Come along, Asta, inside." "But I want to," Asta began to protest. "Inside, Asta," Sister Lily repeated firmly, though her voice was kind. "Father Orsi will handle this." Followed without argument, still staring at the boy who had appeared from impossible circumstances. But Asta required a gentle but insistent push toward the door, his green eyes locked on the newcomer with barely contained excitement. Once they were alone, Father Orsi approached the boy slowly, putting on his most reassuring smile, though it felt somewhat forced after the reality-shattering experience he'd just witnessed. The boy was still crouched on the ground, looking around with those wide, dark eyes as if seeing the world for the first time. _Pav change. Kenji Pav. One moment I was screaming through dimensional space, the next I was plummeting through what looked like a living painting. The world around me was alive, colors swirled and danced in patterns that defied physics, moving with the same fluid grace I'd watched Hero X manipulate reality with. Brilliant purples bled into electric blues, golden streams of light curved through impossible geometries, and the very air seemed to pulse with animated energy. It was exactly like the scenes from To Be Hero X, when X would alter reality, when the animation itself would shift to show his power reshaping the world. This is what X sees, I thought with a mixture of terror and wonder as I continued falling. This is what reality looks like when it's being rewritten. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything snapped back to normal. The living colors drained away like water, the impossible patterns collapsed into mundane three-dimensional space, and I found myself falling through ordinary blue sky toward an ordinary village courtyard. But I was still falling, and the ground was getting very close very fast. Crystalline hands made of water materialized beneath me, catching me with surprising gentleness before I could become a Kenji-shaped crater in the dirt. The magic felt cool against my skin as the water constructs lowered me carefully to the ground. I landed in a crouch, my legs shaking from the adrenaline and shock. For several long moments, I just knelt there, breathing heavily and trying to process what had just happened. My hands, looking a lot smaller than they used to be, pressed against the packed earth as I struggled to gather my bearings. I'm really here, I thought, staring at my child-sized fingers. I'm actually in the Black Clover universe, and I looked down at myself, taking in the simple brown pants and beige shirt that had replaced the white suit I'd been wearing during my dramatic entrance. My hair, when I pulled a strand in front of my eyes, was black instead of the white it had been moments ago. The Rob wasn't kidding about the dramatic entrance settling into something normal. The reality of my situation hit me like a truck. I was 6 years old again, in a world where magic was real, where social hierarchy was determined by power, where I looked up at the clear blue sky and couldn't contain my outrage any longer. That was a little more than dramatic. My voice cracked slightly on the last word, reminding me that I was indeed a child now. But honestly, that omnipotent being could have warned me better about the whole, falling through animated reality, part of the experience. As my breathing slowly returned to normal, I became aware of voices nearby. A man was approaching, tall, kind-faced, wearing simple priestly robes. Father Orsi, if my memory of the series was correct. Behind him, I could see a woman with long, flowing hair holding 2 babies, and 2 small figures being ushered toward a building. Asta and I realized with a start. They're so small. Hello there, young man, Father Orsi said gently, his voice warm despite what must have been considerable shock at witnessing my reality-bending entrance. I'm Father Orsi. I run the church here in Hage Village. What's your name, child? I looked up at him, and for a moment felt overwhelmed by the kindness in his eyes. This man had just witnessed something impossible, and his first instinct was to make sure I was okay. Kenji Nakamura doesn't exist in this world, I thought quickly. But Kenji, that could work as just a first name. I paused, letting genuine confusion show on my face. My name is Kenji. Nice to meet you, Kenji, he replied, his smile becoming more genuine. Can you tell me where you came from? Do you remember what just happened here? I let my brow furrow as I pretended to search through memories. The truth was complicated. I remembered everything about my previous life and my conversation with the Rob, but claiming amnesia would be easier than trying to explain interdimensional reincarnation. I don't remember, I said, injecting genuine uncertainty into my voice. I don't know where I came from, or what that was. I looked around at the simple village, taking in the humble buildings and dirt paths. Where am I, exactly? You're in Hage Village, in the forsaken realm of the Clover Kingdom, Father Orsi explained gently. Would you like to come inside? We can talk more there, and perhaps Sister Lily can get you something to eat. At the mention of food, my stomach chose that moment to growl loudly, reminding me that this new body hadn't eaten anything. Yes, please, I think I'd like that. Father Orsi extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, I took it. His palm was warm and calloused from years of work, and something about the simple gesture made my chest tight with emotion I hadn't expected, embarrassment. I am a 22-year-old man, this is so embarrassing acting like this. As we approached the church door, I noticed it was slightly ajar with a distinctive green eye peering through the crack. I had to bite back a smile. Asta was already living up to his reputation for boundless curiosity. Father Orsi opened the door fully, and immediately Asta tumbled out, his face red with embarrassment. In his fall, he grabbed onto Yuno's leg and sent both boys crashing to the floor in a tangle of limbs. Asta, Sister Lily scolded, though her voice held more exasperation than real anger. What have I told you about eavesdropping? I wasn't eavesdropping, Asta protested from his position on the floor. I was just, really interested listening. That's the definition of eavesdropping, you idiot, Yuno said with characteristic bluntness, trying to extract himself from Asta's accidental embrace. I couldn't help it, I started laughing. The whole situation was so perfectly Asta, so exactly what I'd expected from watching the series, that the absurdity of it all hit me at once. Here I was, reincarnated into an anime world with reality manipulating powers, and I was watching the future Wizard King and his rival wrestling on the floor like normal kids. My laughter immediately drew everyone's attention back to me. Asta's head snapped up, his green eyes widening as he took in my presence. He shot to his feet with impressive speed, leaving Yuno sprawled on the floor, and ran over to me with stars practically shining in his eyes. That was so cool, how did you do that? Are you a wizard? Can you teach me? What was that colorful stuff? Can you fly? Are you from the noble realm? Why were you screaming? That was awesome. Asta fired off questions at machine gun pace, his voice getting louder with each word. Yuno followed at a much slower pace, his golden eyes studying me with curiosity but approaching more timidly than his adoptive brother. The volume and rapid-fire nature of Asta's questions made me freeze for a second, my brain struggling to process the enthusiastic barrage. But then I smiled, about to attempt answering at least some of them, when Father Orsi stepped in. Asta, calm down, he said gently but firmly. Give Kenji some space, he's had quite an ordeal. Sister Lily stepped forward, and I got my first clear look at the woman who would become such an important figure in Asta and Yuno's lives. She was even more beautiful than the anime had portrayed, with kind silver eyes and an aura of gentle warmth. This is Sister Lily, Father Orsi introduced. Sister, this is Kenji. He'll be joining us for a while. It's nice to meet you, Kenji, Sister Lily said with a warm smile. You must be hungry, let me get you something to eat. She led us toward what I assumed was the kitchen, while Father Orsi turned to Asta and Yuno. You two need to finish your chores before lunch. But, Asta started to protest. Chores first, Father Orsi said with gentle firmness. You can talk with Kenji more at lunch. Both boys reluctantly headed off, though I caught Asta looking back at me several times with barely contained excitement. The kitchen was simple but homey, with a large wooden table and chairs that had clearly seen years of use. Sister Lily busied herself preparing what looked like potatoes while Father Orsi and I sat down across from each other. Now then, Father Orsi said, his voice kind but serious. Can you remember anything about where you're from? We'd like to help you get home if possible. I considered this carefully. I needed to establish a background that would explain my presence without raising too many questions. The Clover Kingdom was isolated enough that claiming to be from elsewhere wouldn't be easily verified. The best lies are mostly truth, I thought. I'm not from this kingdom, and I don't recognize the name because I'm literally from another world. Not technically lying. I don't think I'm from the Clover Kingdom, I said slowly, as if trying to remember. I don't recognize that name at all. Father Orsi's eyebrows rose slightly. That's unusual. You must be from quite far away then. Another continent, perhaps. Perfect. Let him draw his own conclusions. I had decided that acting like I wasn't from here was the best approach. Nobody knew me in this world, and there was no point in lying about not remembering where I was from when the truth, that I was from an entirely different reality, was so close to that story anyway. Would you like to stay here for the time being? Father Orsi asked gently, at least until we can figure out how to get you home, or until someone comes looking for you. The offer was exactly what I'd hoped for, but I made sure to show appropriate hesitation before nodding. If it wouldn't be too much trouble. I don't want to be a burden. Nonsense, Father Orsi said with a warm smile. We'd be happy to have you. Lunch is ready, Sister Lily called out, and I heard the thunder of small feet as Asta and Yuno came running. As we all sat around the table, Sister Lily had prepared simple but hearty food that smelled amazing. Father Orsi made his announcement. Everyone, Kenji will be living with us from now on. I want you all to get along and help him feel welcome. Asta's face lit up like the sun. Really? That's awesome. We're gonna be the best of friends. I'll show you everything. We can train together. This is so cool. Yuno, more timid but clearly interested, simply nodded. Welcome, he said quietly. As I looked around the table at these people who had so quickly accepted a strange boy who'd fallen from the sky, I felt something warm settle in my chest. Father Orsi's gentle kindness, Sister Lily's maternal warmth, Asta's boundless enthusiasm, Yuno's quiet acceptance, and even the soft gurgling of the babies, it all felt more like home than anything I'd experienced in my previous life. This doesn't seem so bad, I thought, taking a bite of the simple but delicious food. Maybe this is where my new life really begins. And as Asta launched into an animated explanation of all the awesome things we could do together, I found myself genuinely smiling for the first time since arriving in this world. Hope you enjoyed. Please leave a comment and share your thoughts on the story so far. Shadows Cribe 19 creators, thoughts. 11 comments 0 vote. Chapter 3. Mana Awakened. Before continuing, I thought I should clarify how I will integrate the trust system into Black Clover for Kenji better. When Kenji gains trust, he gains more mana, which in turn helps him use his powers more freely. The more trust he has, the more mana he will have, and will be able to manipulate more with his power and a greater area. Before he gets his grimoire, he will be limited in what he can do even with more mana, but after he will have more freedom with his abilities. Thanks for reading and enjoy the chapter. Timeskip. 1 week. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard as I stepped outside, already mentally preparing for the day's chores. It was hard to believe that only a week had passed since my dramatic entrance into this world. In some ways, it felt like I'd been here forever. In others, like I was still adjusting to the reality of being 6 years old again. A week, I mused as I walked toward the well where I knew Asta would probably be attempting to haul water with more enthusiasm than technique. 7 days of living in an anime world, and I'm already falling into a routine. The past week had been a whirlwind of adjustment. Living with Asta and Yuno had been both exactly what I'd expected and completely different from watching them on screen. Asta's boundless energy wasn't just loud. It was infectious, pulling everyone around him into his orbit of enthusiasm. From the moment he woke up, usually by falling out of bed, he was ready for adventure, and just about anything that sounded remotely exciting. Kenji, let's go explore the forest, had become his morning greeting. Yuno, on the other hand, had been more reserved. For the first few days, he'd watched me with those sharp golden eyes, clearly trying to figure out where I fit into his and Asta's dynamic. But gradually, he'd begun including me in conversations, asking quiet questions about where I thought I might be from, or simply sitting nearby while we did chores together. The sleeping arrangements had been interesting. The three of us shared a small room with simple beds, and I'd quickly learned that Asta was an active sleeper. More than once, I'd woken up to find him somehow upside down or sprawled across multiple beds. Yuno, predictably, slept peacefully and quietly, though I'd caught him more than once staying awake to make sure Asta didn't accidentally roll off the bed entirely. But perhaps the most frustrating aspect of this new life was the complete absence of my supposed powers. I had no mana, zero, nothing. When I focused inward, Searching for that spark of magical energy that should have been there, I found only empty space. It was like trying to flex a muscle that didn't exist. This had naturally worried both Father Orsi and Sister Lily. In a world where magic was as fundamental as breathing, a child showing no signs of mana was concerning. It reminded everyone uncomfortably of Asta's situation. "Don't worry about it too much, Kenji," Father Orsi had said just yesterday, his voice gentle but tinged with concern. "Some children develop their magic later than others. And even if you don't have magic, that doesn't make you any less valuable." I'd smiled and nodded, assuring him that I wasn't worried. "I have a feeling my magic will come soon," I'd said, which was technically true. According to the Rob, I needed trust to generate mana, and trust took time to build. Still, the waiting was agonizing. At least I know why I don't have powers yet, I thought, kicking at a small stone. No trust means no mana, meaning no reality manipulation. But how exactly do I get people to trust me? Just being helpful and friendly? There has to be more to it than Kenji. My musings were interrupted by the familiar sound of Asta's voice, pitched at approximately the volume of a war horn. I looked up to see him racing toward me, his ash blonde hair bouncing with each step, a grin stretched across his face that could have powered the entire village. "There you are," he shouted, skidding to a stop in front of me and kicking up a small cloud of dust. "I've been looking everywhere." "Well, not everywhere, but I checked the kitchen and you weren't there, and then I checked the storage room and you weren't there either, but Sister Lily said you might be outside and..." "Breathe, Asta," I said with a laugh, holding up my hands. "I'm here. What's the plan for today?" His eyes lit up even brighter, if that was possible. "We gotta find Yuno. I have this awesome idea for a new training exercise where we see who can carry the most water buckets at once, and then maybe we could practice climbing trees, and oh, we could see who can jump the farthest from the..." "Kenji," Sister Lily's voice interrupted Asta's enthusiastic planning. I turned to see her approaching with a basket of laundry in her arms and baby Rekka balanced on her hip. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but would you mind helping me for a moment? Rekka's been fussy this morning, and I could use an extra pair of hands while I fold this laundry." I glanced at Asta, who immediately deflated like a punctured balloon. "Ah, but we were gonna..." "It'll just be for a little while," I said, giving him an apologetic smile. "We can find Yuno and do your training after Sister Lily's finished with the laundry, okay?" Asta's disappointment lasted all of 3 seconds before he perked up again. "Oh, I can help too. I'm really good at folding." This was, I knew from experience, a generous interpretation of his laundry skills. "That's very sweet of you, Asta," Sister Lily said with the patient smile of someone who had learned to appreciate enthusiasm over efficiency. "Why don't you both come help me?" I walked over and carefully took Rekka from Sister Lily's arms. The baby gurgled contentedly, her tiny fingers immediately reaching for my hair. At 6 months old, she was all chubby cheeks and bright eyes, and holding her filled me with a protectiveness I hadn't expected. "There we go," I murmured softly, adjusting my grip to make sure she was secure. "You're getting big, aren't you, Rekka?" Sister Lily began spreading the laundry out on the grass, while Asta bounced around nearby, trying to help but mostly just moving things from one pile to another with questionable organization. I sat down cross-legged on the ground, keeping Rekka safely in my lap while she played with my fingers. "Kenji, look, I folded this one really, whoa." I looked up just in time to see Asta trip spectacularly over a water bucket that had been left near the well. The bucket went flying, arcing through the air in what seemed like slow motion, and I realized with growing horror that its trajectory was aimed directly at me and Rekka. No mana, no powers, just a 6-year-old body and reflexes. Time seemed to slow as panic flooded my system. The bucket was heavy, full of water, and moving fast enough to seriously hurt a baby. Asta was scrambling to his feet, his face pale with horror. Sister Lily was turning toward us, her eyes widening as she processed what was happening. Without thinking, I twisted my body to shield Rekka completely, hunching over her protectively as the bucket struck me squarely in the back. The impact sent pain shooting through my small frame, and the cold water soaked through my clothes instantly, but Rekka remained completely dry and safe in my arms. "Kenji," Sister Lily's voice was sharp with panic as she dropped the laundry and rushed over. "Are you hurt?" "Oh no, Rekka. I'm okay," I managed, though my back throbbed where the bucket had hit. "Rekka's fine. She's completely fine." Sister Lily's hands were shaking as she gently took Rekka from my arms, her eyes frantically checking the baby for any sign of injury. When she found none, she let out a shuddering breath of relief. "Oh, Thank goodness, she whispered, pressing a soft kiss to Rekka's forehead. Then she looked at me, her silver eyes bright with unshed tears. Kenji, you were so brave. You protected her without even thinking about yourself. Her voice was thick with emotion as she continued, you're a hero. A real hero. I felt my cheeks warm at the praise, but something else was happening too. Deep in my chest, I felt a strange sensation, like a warm current flowing through my body. It was subtle but unmistakable, a feeling of fullness where before there had been nothing. Mana. My eyes widened as I realized what had just happened. Sister Lily's words, her genuine gratitude and admiration, had triggered something. Trust. Real, honest trust from someone who truly meant it. The first trust points, I thought with growing excitement. It actually worked. I could feel the mana now, a small but definite presence inside me. It wasn't much, probably enough for only the most basic reality alterations, but it was there. After a week of emptiness, I finally had access to my powers, even if just a tiny fraction of them. I'm really okay, Sister Lily, I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. Just a little bruised, nothing serious. You should still let me check, she began, but I was already scrambling to my feet. Actually, I think I need to go for a walk. Clear my head a bit. The adrenaline, you know. It was a weak excuse, but I desperately wanted to test this new mana, to see what I could actually do with it. Sister Lily looked concerned, but before she could protest, I was already backing away. I'll be careful, just going to walk around the fields for a bit. I turned and practically jogged toward the open fields behind the church, my heart racing with anticipation. Finally, I would get to test my powers. Even if it was just a small amount of mana, it was a start. The field was empty and peaceful, with tall grass swaying gently in the breeze. I found a spot far enough from the church to avoid unwanted attention and sat down, closing my eyes to focus on the warm sensation of mana flowing through my body. Okay, I thought, let's see what Hero X's powers actually feel like. I tried to reach for that familiar snap gesture I'd seen Hero X use countless times, but stopped myself. I had no idea how much mana this would require, and I didn't want to waste my first opportunity. Instead, I focused on the smallest possible alteration I could imagine, maybe changing the color of a single blade of grass. But before I could attempt anything, I heard familiar voices approaching fast. Kenji, there you are, Asta's voice carried across the field as he came running toward me, with Yuno following at a more measured pace behind him. Sister Lily said you came out here. That was so cool how you saved Rekka. You were like whoosh and the bucket was like crashin'. Are you actually okay? Yuno interrupted, his golden eyes studying me carefully. Any experimentation would have to wait. I sighed internally but smiled at my approaching friends. I'm fine, really, just needed some fresh air. Great, Asta grabbed my arm and started pulling me to my feet. Because Yuno and I came up with an even better training idea. We're gonna see who can climb the highest tree without using magic. As I let myself be dragged back toward the village, I couldn't help but smile. My first taste of mana would have to wait, but that was okay. I had taken the first real step toward unlocking Hero X's powers. And surprisingly, I found I didn't mind the interruption as much as I thought I would. Spending time with Asta and Yuno, being part of their small family, that felt pretty good too. 6 comments 0 vote. Chapter 4, Growing Stronger. 2 years later. The thin coating of mana wrapped around my body flickered and wavered as I concentrated, trying to maintain the delicate balance. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cool evening air in the forest clearing behind the church. My muscles trembled with the effort of keeping the energy stable. Just a few more seconds, I told myself, gritting my teeth as the mana skin threatened to collapse. Hold it together. But my concentration finally broke, and the protective layer of mana dissipated like morning mist. I collapsed to my knees on the forest floor, breathing heavily as exhaustion washed over me. That's all I can manage for now, I muttered to myself, wiping sweat from my brow with a dirt-stained hand. 2 years. It had been 2 years since I'd gained my first taste of mana from Sister Lily's trust value, and while I'd made progress, it felt frustratingly slow compared to what I knew I should be capable of. But at least I'm getting somewhere, I reminded myself as I sat back against a tree trunk. Over the past 2 years, I'd gradually gained small amounts of additional mana from Father Orsi, Nash, and Rekka. Each increment was modest, nothing like the flood I'd received from Sister Lily, but they'd slowly built up my reserves enough to make real training possible. More importantly, they'd allowed me to experiment with different applications of my energy. What puzzled me was the complete absence of trust points from Asta and Yuno. Despite growing closer to them, despite them clearly viewing me as their big brother, I hadn't received a single drop of mana from either of them. Maybe it's because they're main characters, I theorized, stretching my sore muscles. Maybe their trust works differently, or maybe I need to do something more significant to earn it. Rather than waste time trying to force Hero X's dimensional abilities, which still required far more mana than I possessed, I'd focused on techniques I remembered from the anime. Captain Yami's mana enhancement had been my primary inspiration, and I'd made decent progress in wrapping my muscles with energy to increase my strength and speed. The mana skin technique, however, remained frustratingly elusive. I could create a thin layer of protective energy around my body for a few seconds, but it was weak and unstable. Still, it was progress. And at least my hand-to-hand combat is improving, I thought, flexing my hands and remembering the kickboxing training from my previous life. Without proper sparring partners, as Asta and Yuno were still just kids playing around, my martial arts practice was limited to solo drills and techniques, but muscle memory was slowly returning. The past 2 years had also deepened my relationships with everyone at the church. Asta and Yuno now genuinely saw me as their older brother, coming to me with problems, asking for help with everything from climbing trees to understanding Sister Lily's lessons. Nash and Rekka, now 4 and 3 respectively, followed me around like devoted shadows, calling me Kenji ni, and demanding piggyback rides. I really do have a family, I mused, watching the sun begin to set through the forest canopy. Even if my powers are still pathetic. The growing darkness reminded me that I should head back. Standing up and brushing dirt from my clothes, I made my way through the trees toward the warm glow of the church. As I emerged from the forest, I noticed Father Orsi and Sister Lily standing by the front door, both looking unusually worried. Their tense postures and hushed conversation made my stomach clench with concern. "Father Orsi, Sister Lily," I called out, jogging toward them. "What's wrong?" The moment Father Orsi spotted me, his face transformed with relief and panic. He rushed over and grabbed me by the shoulders, shaking me frantically. "Kenji, thank goodness you're safe," he exclaimed, his eyes wide with worry. "Yuno went to the village to pick up supplies this morning and hasn't returned." And then Asta ran off looking for him, and tears started sliding down his face. "I'm so worried something's happened to them." I gently but firmly extracted myself from his grip, causing him to stumble and face-plant into the snow. Turning to Sister Lily for confirmation, I saw her nod gravely, her silver eyes filled with concern. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the winter air. The timeline, I realized with sudden clarity. This is around the time when Yuno's pendant gets stolen in the manga. The drunk man, the incident that sparks their rivalry. "I'm going to find them," I declared, already moving toward the door. "Wait, Kenji," Sister Lily started. But I was already grabbing the tree branch I'd been using as a makeshift broom from where it leaned against the wall. Channeling mana into it to make it fly, I launched myself into the darkening sky. "I'm coming too," Father Orsi shouted from behind me, scrambling to his feet. "Wait for me." But I was already soaring toward the village, the cold wind whipping past my face as I pushed my improvised broom to its limits. My heart raced with a mixture of urgency and, admittedly, anticipation. This is it, I thought, banking around a cluster of trees. This is the perfect chance to finally earn Asta and Yuno's trust. Even though things worked out in the anime, this is real life, anything could go wrong. As I approached the village, I climbed higher to get a better view. What I saw below made my blood run cold. Yuno was on the ground, crying and holding his face where he'd clearly been struck. A large, drunk man loomed over him, while Asta, brave, foolish Asta, was frantically attacking the man with his bare fists, only to be easily swatted away again and again. No more hesitation, I decided, diving toward the ground. I scooped up a good-sized rock as I swooped past, wrapping my legs in mana for what I was about to attempt. "Hey," I shouted as I approached the scene. The drunk man looked up just as I snapped my fingers. The sound reverberated through the air with an almost supernatural clarity, and the rock in my hand began glowing with brilliant white light, a simple reality alteration that was well within my current abilities. The sudden blaze of light blinded the man, causing him to stumble backward with his hands over his eyes. I used that moment to leap from my broom, mana-enhanced legs driving me forward in a powerful flying kick that caught him square in the jaw. The impact sent him crashing into a nearby wall with enough force to crack the stone. Yuno's pendant scattered from his grip, landing in the snow nearby. I landed in a crouch, immediately snatching up the necklace and falling into a combat stance, ready to continue the fight. But as the glowing light faded and my vision cleared, I saw the man slumped unconsciously against the wall at an awkward angle. That felt way too easy, I thought, sweat dropping. Maybe I'm stronger than I realized. I straightened up and coughed lightly, trying to look more composed than I felt. Turning to face Asta and Yuno with a small smirk, I slipped one hand casually into my pocket while holding up the pendant with the other. Asta's eyes were practically sparkling with stars, his mouth hanging open in amazement. "That was awesome," he shouted. "You saved us. You went whoosh and then bam and he went flying." Yuno sat in the snow, staring at me with shock and something that looked like awe. His usual composure was completely shattered. I walked over and gently placed the pendant back in Yuno's trembling hands. "You okay?" I asked softly. Yuno clutched the necklace to his chest, tears streaming down his face. I couldn't protect it," he whispered. "I was so weak." "Never better," Asta declared with a grin and a thumbs up, before promptly falling backward into the snow, finally succumbing to his injuries. "Asta," Yuno cried out, crawling over to his friend. Tears ran down his face as he looked at Asta's bruised form. I should've," he sniffled, unable to finish the sentence. Asta smiled up at him despite his battered condition. "Don't worry, Yuno, I've always got your back." Then, with sudden determination blazing in his green eyes, Asta struggled to sit up. "That's why I'm going to get stronger and become the Wizard King." The declaration hung in the air like a challenge. Yuno's eyes widened, then narrowed with matching determination. "No," Yuno said firmly, clenching his fist around his pendant. "I'm the one who needs to get stronger and become the Wizard King." Asta grinned despite his pain. "Well then, I guess that makes us rivals." They reached out and clasped hands, sealing their newfound rivalry with matching looks of determination. Then both of them turned to look at me expectantly. I couldn't help but laugh. "Don't look at me like that. 2 Wizard Kings is enough, I just want to live a fun and free life." "Why do I sound like Luffy?" I thought with amusement. Their faces fell slightly, disappointment clear in their expressions. I reached out and flicked both of their foreheads gently. "Don't look at me like that," I said with a smirk. "Since you guys have such grand goals, I guess it's my job as your older brother to keep you two safe until that happens. Plus, I can't have my younger brothers getting stronger than me, that'll just never happen." The effect was immediate. Both boys' eyes filled with tears of joy, and I could see the absolute trust and faith they placed in me shining in their expressions. "All right, let's get out of here," I said, ruffling their hair. But as I spoke, I saw something that made me freeze. 2 streams of green light, invisible to everyone else, flowed from Asta and Yuno toward my wrist, where the number 4 flickered and changed to 6. Suddenly, an enormous surge of mana flooded into my body, far greater than anything I'd experienced before. Main characters, I realized with excitement. Their trust really is different, more valuable, harder to earn, but worth so much more when you get it. The amount of mana I now possessed felt incredible. Not infinite, but substantial enough that I might actually be able to attempt some of Hero X's simpler abilities. We started walking back toward the church, but suddenly heard a loud yelling getting closer. "Asta, YUNOOOO. Kenji." Father Orsi came flying in on his broom, moving far too fast and looking like he was barely in control. He crashed into all 3 of us in a massive group hug, tears streaming down his face. "Thank goodness you're all safe. I was so worried." Yuno started to blush but quickly tried to put on a stoic expression, while Asta laughed. "Of course we're okay, I'm gonna be the Wizard King after all." As Father Orsi prepared to take Asta and Yuno back on his broom, I felt a mischievous urge. Walking over to the stick I'd flown in on, I picked it up and looked at my companions. "Hee, let me try something now that I have more mana," I muttered to myself. I snapped my fingers, and reality rippled around the wooden branch. Before everyone's amazed eyes, it transformed into a pristine white blanket that immediately began floating in the air. All 3 of them stared in utter shock as I hopped onto my new flying carpet with a grin. "Well," I called out, already rising into the evening sky. "You coming or what?" Before rushing off, leaving them scrambling to catch up. Note: hope you enjoyed the chapter. 6 comments 0 vote. Chapter 5. Finding a Path Forward. 2 years later Hage Village. Walking down a road in the middle of Hage Village, I looked down at my wrist, watching the green number, 10, shimmer into view, visible only to me. A small smile tugged at my lips as I reflected on how much had changed since that incident with Asta and Yuno 2 years ago. It had been 2 years since that day when I'd saved them from the drunk man who'd stolen Yuno's pendant. 2 years since I'd gained their trust and felt that incredible surge of mana that came with it. Even though my number and mana reserves hadn't progressed much since then, the trust from main characters seemed to be a rare, precious thing. I had made great progress over the past 2 years in other ways. After receiving the trust value from Asta and Yuno, my mana reserves had increased drastically, allowing me far more freedom with my powers than I'd ever had before. With the recent addition of my 4 new younger siblings at the church, I'd also managed to increase my trust value from 6 to 10, making this newfound freedom even more pronounced. Through careful experimentation, I'd discovered that my mana reserves now stood at roughly half the value of Yuno's, which, considering Yuno had some of the highest reserves in the series, I thought it would actually be quite impressive. It was around the amount most nobility would possess, though still less than the truly powerful nobles and royalty. I wasn't entirely sure whether this was a lot compared to others, since Asta provided no reference point and my only other comparison had been a magic night I'd glimpsed 4 years ago, about a week after arriving in this world, when knights had come to investigate the phenomenon that had occurred with my arrival and the snap. Luckily, they hadn't asked the church directly, so nothing had pointed back to me. With this substantial increase in mana, I had discovered some frustrating limitations to my powers. I found I wasn't able to affect people directly. My abilities seemed limited to a domain of the environment around me, affecting only objects and materials. I also couldn't manipulate the space around me in any meaningful way. I suspected these restrictions would lift when I received my grimoire, and hopefully that would fully unlock my potential. But the most exciting development had been my newfound ability to create illusions. With enough mana to finally implement the training plan I'd been thinking about for years, I could now directly create illusions of anime characters I remembered from my past life to simulate sparring sessions. I'd been surprised to discover that although I didn't consciously remember every move and fighting style of these characters, when I used my technique, I could somehow reach memories I'd thought were deeply buried. The mana seemed to compensate by using my power to directly bring the character I thought of into reality as an illusion, complete with their techniques and fighting knowledge. Using this method, I'd been able to learn swordsmanship from Yorichi from Demon Slayer, the only skilled swordsman I could think of from anime, since I hadn't been a huge otaku in my past life and had only watched the popular shows. I'd also managed to bring forth an adult version of X to teach myself hand-to-hand combat, as well as Might Guy for his taijutsu techniques. That's right, I was learning how to perfect the art of aura farming with X's fighting style of hands in pockets looking nonchalant. The results had been remarkable. I'd improved tremendously, limited only by my body's age and the fact that I'd only had about a year to train seriously since getting my mana control up to the level needed for this technique. Asta and Yuno had been joining me for training much more frequently lately since the incident, seemingly obsessed with getting stronger and becoming Wizard King. It made me chuckle to myself, especially watching Asta try to learn swordsmanship from sparring with an illusion of Yorichi and myself. The muscle brain attempting to learn actual technique was quite entertaining. I'd also been working with Yuno on mana control, helping him refine his abilities. Coming out of my musings, I looked around and realized that now I needed to figure out a way to gain more trust points and increase my mana reserves further. I'd been pondering how to go about it when I thought about starting to help the villagers around town with different tasks, perhaps working on their farms or assisting with various problems. My contemplation was interrupted by a sudden commotion that caught my attention. A woman came running out onto the street, crying and shouting for Ben, asking if anyone had seen him. People started gathering as the village chief approached, asking what was wrong. She frantically explained that her son Ben had gone missing, and she'd seen bandits running off with other children earlier that morning. Hearing this, the village chief frowned deeply while people around began asking if they could call for magic knights or the hunting party from their village, the group that usually helped drive off magic beasts. But the chief shook his head solemnly, explaining that it would take too long and they weren't guaranteed to come anyway, since magic knights rarely ventured this far out unless there were problems near the borders. Hearing this, the mother began crying harder. I frowned as well, but found myself thinking that if I somehow managed to save those kids, I might be able to gather significantly more trust points and mana. Acting on this thought, I walked over to a nearby tree and grabbed a thick branch. Snapping my fingers, I watched as it transformed into a functional broom. Without hesitation, I launched myself into the sky and flew off toward the forest in the direction the mother had indicated the bandits had gone. After flying around for some time, I sensed a large concentration of mana gathering from a cave up ahead. Frowning, I headed toward it. Approaching the cave entrance, I carefully masked my mana presence and moved inside stealthily. What I saw made my blood boil. Several men were scattered around the cave, with 4 children trapped inside crude cages, crying and looking terrified. Taking stock of the situation, I realized I didn't sense much mana from 3 of the men. They looked like typical slavers or bandits, probably both. However, one of them seemed to have a decent amount of mana, and I could see a bright red grimoire at his side. Psyching myself up, I thought, okay, you can do this. Only 4 of them. You've trained for 4 years for situations like this. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out 4 bronze coins. I tossed one high into the air and snapped my fingers, causing the entire cave to erupt in brilliant white light that blinded the 4 men. They immediately erupted into chaos, screaming curses and covering their eyes. Unaffected by my own spell, I quickly tossed the remaining 3 coins toward the 3 weaker bandits, snapping my fingers again. The coins transformed directly into knives that flew through the air, embedding themselves into the men. They screamed in pain and collapsed to the ground. The last man, gathering his bearings despite the chaos, saw his companions on the floor and screamed in rage. "You little brat, I'll kill you for this." I snapped my fingers again, transforming my makeshift broom into a sword, then wrapped my body in mana to create a protective skin that enhanced my defense, speed, and power. I began running toward the mage. The man sneered, opening his grimoire. "Fire magic! Fireball!" he shouted, sending a large ball of flame hurtling toward me. Cursing internally, I thought, my defense should hold up against this, but the explosion might injure the kids. I quickly pulled out another coin, flicking it forward and snapping my fingers. The coin expanded into a barrier of mana that blocked the fireball's progress. Seeing this display of magic, the man laughed. "With magic like that at your age, you should fetch a good price once I capture you." His grimoire began flipping pages before stopping. Snap! Seeing Kenji running to the side trying to get away, the man aimed his attack at him, pouring a large amount of mana into the spell. Fire creation magic. Fire bull's charge. Creating a massive bull made of fire formed, charging directly at the running Kenji. The fire bull hit its target and the man heard a scream, thinking he had succeeded. He laughed out loud, celebrating his apparent victory. But then he heard a voice directly behind him saying, "Shit, I can't do it." He turned around in shock to see the boy who should be on the other side of the cave burning. Snap! The next thing he knew, a bat came flying directly into his vision, before everything went dark. Flashback. Kenji's pav. "With magic like that at your age, you should fetch a good price once I capture you." After hearing this, I saw the man begin flipping through his grimoire for what I guess would be another spell. Thinking quickly, a plan began to form in my head. Snap! Following the snap, in my place stood a perfect illusion of myself, with the real me blending into the environment around me and suppressing my mana signature as low as possible. The illusion then ran in the opposite direction of the children as to avoid them getting hurt for the next spell, as the real me asked my mana and ran in the opposite direction. I watched as the bull formed and struck my illusion with tremendous force, before coming up behind the man. I raised my sword, preparing to strike him down. But mid-swing, I began to freeze up. I became stressed because I wasn't sure I could actually take a life, causing me to hesitate. Feeling the psychological burden of killing, I muttered to myself, "Shit, I can't do it," before sighing and snapping my fingers, turning my sword into a bat and knocking the man unconscious instead. After the confrontation ended, I found myself breathing heavily, staring at my shaking hands and sweating profusely. I stood there for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened and gather my composure. When I finally walked over to check on the other 3 men, I was shocked to discover they were on the floor, bleeding and no longer breathing. "What? I didn't mean for this to happen," I thought shakily. "That was supposed to incapacitate them, not." I began to internally panic for several minutes before forcing myself to calm down. They were slavers, I reminded myself firmly. They deserved it. Suppress this feeling right now and deal with what's at hand. Yes, that's definitely healthy, but screw it. I went to the crying children, letting them out of their cages and doing my best to calm them down. Snapping my fingers, I created a wagon from a large rock beside the cave entrance and gently placed the children inside, telling them everything would be alright. I tied up the unconscious mage and secured him to the back of the cart. Using my broom to pull the makeshift wagon, I began the journey back to the village with the children safely aboard and the captured bandit dragging behind us on the ground. When I reached the village, I immediately drew looks from the villagers. Seeing the children and the man being dragged behind, I could see the shock and curiosity on the faces of a lot of them. What's going on? Is that Kenji? What is he doing? Who is that man he's dragging? Ignoring the looks for now, I pulled up toward the village chief and the mothers of the missing children. Both the children and their parents called out to each other, running forward and embracing tearfully. The village chief approached me, shocked. Kenji, what the hell happened? I explained the situation, how I'd found the children being held by slavers in a cave, and that the man tied up behind us was one of the kidnappers. The crowd that had been forming listened intently as the village chief's expression shifted from grim to shocked, and then he began scolding me. What the hell were you thinking running off alone like that? You could have got hurt or worse. You should have waited for the hunters to get back to deal with this. Finally, after about a minute of harsh scolding, the village chief began to calm down. Kenji, careful old man, calm down or you're gonna give yourself a heart attack. Hearing this, the chief gained a tick mark before sighing to himself. Smiling, he patted my head saying, "You did a good thing though, Kenji. You're a hero," he mused aloud, "who knows? You might become the first magic knight to come from Hage Village." Hearing this, I smiled confidently and said, "Of course I will, old man, leave it to me," giving him a thumbs up. The mothers and children then approached, thanking me profusely. I smiled somewhat embarrassedly, rubbing the back of my head and telling them not to sweat it. Suddenly, I noticed green lights flowing from the villagers surrounding me toward my wrist. When I looked down, I saw my number had increased dramatically, from 10 to 45. I smiled to myself as I heard someone shout, "Let's celebrate Kenji, the future magic knight." The crowd cheered enthusiastically. As the celebration continued around me, I found myself thinking that I had finally discovered my path forward to getting stronger. By helping people and earning their genuine trust and admiration, I could continue growing in power while making a real difference in their lives. Finishing this though, I heard a loud shout and looked over to once again see Father Orsi flying towards me yelling, "Kenji! What were you thinking? Are you trying to get yourself killed?" Seeing this, I muttered, "Uh-oh," and wanting to escape the coming lecture, yelled out to the villagers around me, "Gotta go," and hopped on my broom flying away, making everyone laugh seeing Father Orsi yelling trying to catch me on the way back to the church. What do you think of this chapter? Let me know in the comments. The next chapter we will see skip forward a bit to see Kenji heading to get his grimoire. With it you will see him do a lot more cool stuff with his powers. If you have any thoughts or anything you wanna see him do with them, let me know. Also, I am torn between having him join the Black Bulls because he wants to live a fun and free life. I know that joining Black Bulls is overused, but it best fits his character, or the Coral Peacocks, as I feel the captain there could show him ways to use his power. Vote here what squad you wanna see him join. Black Bulls, Coral Peacocks, Crimson Lion, Silver Eagles, Green Mantis, Azure Deer, Blue Rose, Purple Orcus, Golden Dawn. 14 comments, 0 vote. Chapter 6. The Grimoire Ceremony. Hage Village 5 years later. A tall 15-year-old boy sat on the grass outside the church, his lean but muscular frame relaxed as he leaned back against an old oak tree. Kenji had grown considerably over the past few years, his shoulders had broadened, his arms and chest had filled out from years of training, and he now stood nearly 6 feet tall. His black hair caught the afternoon sunlight, and his dark eyes held a maturity that belied his age. The younger children of the church were scattered around him on the grass, some playing with toys, others simply enjoying his presence. Looking to his right, Kenji spotted Yuno practicing his wind magic, using precise wind blades to chop firewood. "Yuno," Kenji called out. The golden-eyed boy paused and looked over at him. "Try to make your wind blades as thin as possible," Kenji said with a slight smirk. Those blades couldn't even cut Asta, let alone a magic knight. From nearby, where Asta had been doing push-ups, came the sound of a body hitting the ground. "Hey Kenji, what was that for RRRR?" Asta wailed, face planting into the grass with tears streaming down his face. The children around Kenji burst into laughter at Asta's dramatic reaction, while Yuno's eyes flashed with competitive fire as he focused intently on Kenji's words. Nash, who was sitting next to Rekka helping fold laundry, looked up with confusion. What do you mean, big brother? How could Yuno not cut him? Asta doesn't even have magic. This caused Asta to catch another stray hit to his pride. He fell to all fours with a dark cloud practically hovering over his head, muttering, I'm your big brother too, you know. Kenji's expression grew serious as he looked at Nash. Just because he doesn't have mana doesn't mean you should look down on him. I've told you already, Asta will become strong in his own way. More like stupidly broken, he thought to himself. Nash looked away with a pout, causing Kenji to smile. Stop trying to act all cool and edgy like Yuno, unless you want to become an emo tsundere like him. Asta immediately started laughing loudly while Yuno looked over with a blank expression, though a small tick mark appeared on his forehead. A small girl with black hair tugged at Kenji's sleeve. Big brother, what's a tsundere? She asked, mispronouncing the word. With a completely straight face, Kenji replied, it's Yuno. She nodded seriously, accepting this explanation without question. A small blonde boy peeked out from behind her. What's an emo? Kenji turned to him with the same deadpan expression. What Yuno pretends to be. The boy nodded as well, while more tick marks appeared on Yuno's increasingly twitching forehead. To distract them from asking more questions before he truly angered Yuno, Kenji grabbed some pieces of grass and threw them into the air. Snap! The grass transformed into colorful paper butterflies that fluttered around the children, who giggled and chased after them with delight. Getting some peace, Kenji leaned back and raised his fist to check his wrist. The green number, 5023, glowed softly, visible only to him, causing him to smile with satisfaction. Over the past 5 years, he had made tremendous progress. After saving those children, he had begun systematically clearing out bandits from the area, acting as an unofficial guardian for the villagers of Hage. He started hunting mana beasts with the village hunting parties, eventually going solo and venturing to other nearby villages to do the same, using these missions as both training and opportunities to gain trust points. The villagers had taken notice of his actions, gradually seeing him as their residential magic knight and trusting that he could keep them safe. With his growing popularity in Hage and the surrounding villages, his trust value had continued to increase steadily. He had become known as the hope of the future for Hage Village. Kenji, Father Orsi voice called out as he approached with a warm smile. It's time. Kenji looked up at him. Today's the day, huh? He had turned 15 this year, and it was officially time to receive his grimoire. Standing up and stretching his tall frame, Kenji said, well, let's get going then, Father, and walked over to grab his magic broom. Ah, I'm so jealous you're getting your grimoire already. Asta came running over, shouting at the top of his lungs. Still, I won't let you pull further ahead of me. I gotta train extra hard now so I can become Wizard King. And then I'll marry Sister Lily. He turned and ran toward the demon skull in the distance. Good luck, Kenji. Kenji smiled, then looked over at Yuno, who muttered, idiot. Hey, if anything happens, it's up to you, Kenji called out to Yuno. Yuno nodded seriously. Good luck, brother Kenji. Don't think this means you'll be stronger though. Kenji laughed. How many times have you won our little spars again? Yuno looked away as if he hadn't heard and walked in the opposite direction from where Asta had gone to train. The younger children gathered around, calling out, good luck, big bro. While Sister Lily smiled at him warmly. Stay safe and good luck, she said. Kenji smiled back at them. I'll see you guys later. He hopped onto his broom alongside Father Orsi and dramatically snapped his fingers, causing brilliant fireworks to erupt and block everyone's view. When the colorful display faded, both he and Father Orsi had vanished. As they flew toward their destination, Father Orsi secretly thought to himself, I bet the kids will think I'm so cool now after seeing me disappear like that with Kenji. Scene change Grimoire Tower. The Grimoire Tower loomed before them, a massive structure of ancient stone that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. Countless windows dotted its surface, each one glowing with a soft, mystical light. The tower's base was wider than several buildings combined, and intricate magical symbols were carved into every visible surface. At its peak, barely visible from the ground, a brilliant light pulsed like a heartbeat. Walking toward the front entrance, Kenji thought, this is it, huh? I wonder if any stereotypes will happen while I'm in there, like young masters causing problems, or someone trying to attack me like when Yuno and Asta get their grimoires. The thought actually excited him. When he walked inside, he saw dozens of people around his age gathered in the vast interior space, the tower stretching up so high that the top was lost in shadows. Countless grimoires lined the walls on floating shelves that defied gravity. As he looked around, people began to notice him, muttering, "Hey, that's him," while parents smiled and waved in greeting, which Kenji returned with a friendly smile. He glanced around for any nobles but saw none. Well, I guess it makes sense nobles wouldn't get their grimoires this far out in the country. Wonder why they were here in the anime. He paused. Probably plot convenience. An elderly man with long white hair and an equally long white beard stepped forward and cleared his throat. Ahem. Welcome, young men and women. On this day, you will all begin a new journey and walk your own path. I wish you all faith, hope, and love. His voice carried clearly through the massive space. For those who don't know, I am the master of this grimoire tower. Now, never once has anyone from this region distinguished themselves by becoming a magic knight and wizard king. I pray that one among you will have what it takes to become the most powerful mage in the land. His expression shifted to one of intense enthusiasm. Seriously, I mean it. Clearing his throat again, he composed himself. Ahem. And now, it is time to accept your grimoires. With the ending of his speech, countless books of various colors and sizes began flying off the shelves toward everyone around them. The crowd erupted in excited shouts as people reached up for their grimoires. Kenji watched the scene with amazement, but suddenly a nervous thought struck him. Wait, I really hope that Rob doesn't make anything excessive happen here like last time. His expression darkened. What am I thinking? Of course he will. As the last people were receiving their grimoires, a loud snap resonated throughout the tower. A brilliant white book appeared above the crowd, and suddenly reality itself began to change around them. People became two-dimensional, some getting stuck in walls, while others appeared as living sketches. Bright colors and animated shapes filled the air, completely transforming the landscape of the tower into something from a surreal dream. Seeing this chaos unfold, Kenji developed dark lines on his face as he muttered, "Of course." He sighed to himself. Well, might as well embrace it. Smiling, he reached up toward the floating white book. When it landed in his hands, he made it float beside him, put one hand casually in his pocket, struck a dramatic pose, and loudly snapped his fingers. Snap. The world around everyone abruptly returned to normal. When the chaos settled and people regained their bearings, they looked toward the source of the snapping sound and their jaws dropped at what they saw. Standing before them was a tall 15-year-old boy with stark white hair and bright whitish-blue eyes hidden behind square black-framed glasses. He wore a completely white suit with white shoes, a black undershirt, and a bright silver X-shaped tie clip. The boy stood with one leg crossed over the other, the tip of his right foot pointing down while his left leg remained firmly planted. One hand rested casually in his pocket while the other was extended in a snapping position. Floating beside him was a brilliant white grimoire that seemed to glow with its own inner light. 4 leaves adorned its cover with a large X running through the clover symbol. With a slight smirk, he spoke in a low voice that somehow carried clearly to everyone in the building. So this is where the fun begins, and his smile grew wider. Thinking he should try to make a cool exit, and feeling the limits he previously had on his powers before breaking, he got excited to test the powers out and turned towards a wall at the back of the room. Well then, I suppose it's time we depart. What do you say, father? With another snap of his fingers, both the boy and Father Orsi vanished from the room, leaving behind a crowd still reeling from what they'd witnessed. With Kenji gone, everyone began to come out of their shock. Was that a 4-leaf grimoire? What the hell just happened? That was so scary. What was going on with the room just now? Forget that. I almost had a heart attack. I was stuck in a wall. At least you still looked human. My wife looked like a kid's drawing. In the corner, the grimoire tower master stood with an astonished expression, thinking to himself, so a legendary 4-leaf clover grimoire has appeared, and in my tower, no less. Just who was that boy? I must contact Julius immediately and inform him of this. This is unprecedented. With that thought, he quickly announced the end of the ceremony before hurrying off to his office to use a communication crystal to contact the Wizard King at the royal capital. And unbeknownst to him, a green light shot out of him in the direction of the church. Hope you enjoyed the chapter. Shadows Cribe 19 creators, thoughts?